The Dallas Cowboys got a really nice win against Washington on Christmas Day, but now it's time to lose. We'll tell you why next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us the #1 sports podcast network. And on today's show, Landon and I are talking about why the Dallas Cowboys need to tank in Week 18. We're going to talk about it from a draft value standpoint. We'll talk about how you do it. But Landon, the Cowboys go into a very meaningless Week 18. There's nothing they can gain really from the standings outside of going 8-1. You got a nice win against Washington in Week 17 in a primetime, spot. It does feel like now is the right time to maybe pull the reins back in a little bit.
Yeah, and again, I think we've been very clear for people that are everydayers about what we mean here, but just in case someone is stumbling upon this podcast for the first time, we are not advocating for, and we do not believe that the NFL fully tanks the way that we've seen some NBA teams do. We believe it's done, and we'll talk a little bit about that in segment 3 about how properly done, but not specifically, intentionally trying to lose. No. Yeah, I think to go back to the importance of it, I think we're going to get into the value that and the gained and lost here, but to me, you get the kind of motivating win to point to the future, last week in Washington, right? And this week with New York, I mean, it's easy for you to find an escape route. It's the last week of the season. Clearly, as you mentioned, you weren't playing for anything last week. You certainly aren't playing for anything this week. I think, especially since you're traveling to New York, again, another week where you're traveling, I think it's easy for you to kind of find a way to motivate the team into having a good week of practice, but through some things that we'll talk about, maybe ultimately not fielding your best team to try to win the game out on Week 18.
And there is a difference between shutting a player down or players down for 2 weeks rather than one. And I think we talked about this during the squad show. It's a lot harder to do that when you are playing a Thursday game on Christmas, standalone game on Netflix. But when you're playing a 1:00 game, when there's 8 other games going on during that time slot, it's just a lot easier to do it. You don't have as many eyeballs on you. Now, the Cowboys are always going to have a ton of people watching them, but what we're talking about is why this makes the most sense long-term for the Cowboys. Because first of all, a couple of things. You don't want to get players hurt. You want to make sure that you are as healthy as can be going into the 2026 offseason, because it's going to be a really big offseason for the Cowboys. And then on top of that, you're playing on what arguably the worst field in the NFL. If there was ever a game to pull important players, this is it. That MetLife field is atrocious. It gets worse as the season goes along. There's really no upside. Try to tell me, what's the best possible outcome the Cowboys can have from a win in this game? You score 38 points. Your defense holds Jackson Dart to 3 points. You go 8-1. Is anybody really going to care if Brian Schottenheimer goes 8-1 versus 7-9-1? I don't think so. They didn't make the playoffs, and that was ultimately one of the bigger goals.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's them. They'll care, and for them, it's
why?
About
What's
but no. But I listen to your point. I get it. Why? But I think for them, it's like this is what they do. I also think that this is why you can't tank like you would do in the NBA, right? Is because these guys just aren't wired that way. That's why they have to be kind of pulled back in certain segments and kind of managed to do that. But the reason to do it as far as a team-wide, situation, I think that's the difference, right? Is there's the coaching GM level, and then there's the player level. And the player level, you cannot exist with the idea of going into a week where you're not trying to win.
No, because you're going to get hurt. You'll
exactly.
get hurt if you try to play at 75% speed. This is a coaching and front office decision, not a player decision.
Yeah, so it's got to exist there, and so ultimately, like I said, we'll get into kind of the mechanics of how to do it properly. But I think that's the motivation has got to be at that level, at the GM coaching level. You got to be taking a longer view. I think the players ultimately kind of subconsciously, at the very least, know like that if they are getting pulled for a minor injury, that maybe that this is what's going on. But I think it's a really delicate balance that the coaching staff and not so much the GMs, but specifically the coaching staff has to kind of partake in order to manage the situation, so you're not appearing to tank while also trying to tank, while also trying to make sure that you're not screwing with people's contract situations, right? Because they have certain goals that they have.
Well, and that was a point that I was going to make, is we've seen other organizations, they'll pull a guy off the field, but they'll give him whatever incentive he was trying to get. Maybe he was a sack away from a $400,000 bonus. Just give him that incentive, pull him off the field, and make sure he doesn't get hurt. And again, I think tanking's not the right word, but not trying everything to win.
Yeah.
It's more accepted in week 18 than maybe it is in like week 15, 16, 17. We've seen teams like the Chiefs, Rashee Rice has been a little bit banged up. Do you think if Kansas City was in a Super Bowl, or a playoff chase right now, Rashee Rice would be on the field? Absolutely. But Kansas City put him on the injured reserve list because they want to make sure that he's healthy for the upcoming season. That's all you need to do here. And I think for guys like Quinnen Williams, who's banged up, Javonte Williams, who we've seen a lot of, CeeDee Lamb, who's dealing with a high ankle injury, maybe you let those guys play a little bit and then you pull them. But to give them their normal amount of snaps on that field, actually, not only do I not think they shouldn't do that, I kind of think it's dumb. What are you trying to gain by giving those guys that many snaps on one of the worst fields in the league?
Yeah, and ultimately, I think the other thing too is that we as a fan base are kind of just used to it a little bit more on week 18. I mean, not only for the teams that are not successful, that are just trying to make sure that their good players don't get hurt in a meaningless game, but for teams that are very successful, that are trying to make sure that their players aren't getting hurt in a meaningless game because they already have secured the number 1 seed or whatever, a playoff berth. So ultimately, I just think it's a little more couth to kind of go this route, or at least to kind of handle the situation the way that ultimately we're going to prescribe here in a little bit.
All right, let's go through the reasons why the Cowboys should consider losing. I'm not saying tanking, but losing in week 18. We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gusto. Let's be real. No one starts a business for the joy of calculating tax withholdings or managing payroll spreadsheets, but that's where Gusto comes in to take the stress out of payroll, benefits, and HR so that you can focus on running your business and supporting your team. Gusto is the all-in-one remote-friendly payroll and HR platform that makes managing your team simple, transparent, and fast. Whether you're hiring, onboarding, or paying employees, Gusto helps you do it all from one place without the hassle and the hidden fees. An unlimited payroll runs for one monthly price, which means no surprise charges at the end of the month. And knowing that you can reach certified HR experts anytime gives you real peace of mind. So try Gusto today at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL and get 3 months free when you run your first payroll. That's right, 3 months of free payroll at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL. One more time, that's gusto.com/LockedOnNFL. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. If you haven't done so already, check out the Everydayer Club. You're going to get ad-free episodes for just $5 a month or $50 a year, plus exclusive Discord server access and so much more. Check it out in the show notes or at the lockedoncowboys.supercast.com link. All right, let's talk about where the Cowboys are right now. So as of this posting, the Cowboys currently have like the 14th or so pick, just depending on some of the numbers you use. It's a little bit different from site to site. However, if they were to win Landon on Sunday and they get to 8-1, because of the way that stupid tie is going to work out, it's very likely, and because of some of the way that these games are going to fall, the Cowboys would draft at 17 or 18, which is about the worst spot you can be in the entire draft because you don't make the playoffs and you are drafting at the very, very last spot. So it's a big deal, but if they were to lose, you could climb all the way up to 12. And the difference between 12 and 18 is pretty drastic.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, on multiple different levels, not only in draft value level, and we'll talk about that in a second, but also just in the type of player you're going to get, right? And I think, you know, we haven't really dove too far into the draft prep, but even if you stuck your toe in a little bit, you're seeing that it's not a great year for top end blue chip players. It's not a great year for quarterbacks or, you know, the top offensive tackles to kind of push people down. There isn't a Myles Garrett level defensive end or player like that that's going to push talent down. So you kind of want to be near the top of the first round with one of your picks, because if perchance one of these, you know, few handful of blue chip defensive players happens to fall out of the top 10, you want to have an opportunity to scoop them up. And I think at 12, you still have an opportunity to get potentially the best player at their position in the draft, you know, especially specifically on defense, right?
So generally, let's say you're picking at 12. And honestly, that's probably where the Cowboys would be drafting if they were to lose on Sunday. You look at some of the teams, you know, in that range. You know, Tampa Bay, they have a winner go home game against Carolina. You've got Detroit, who's playing Chicago this week. Now, Chicago might be resting starters, and I just think Dan Campbell's going to play a lot of the guys. Baltimore has a win in your in game. Even someone like Miami, they're playing better football. I wouldn't be surprised if Mike McDaniel is kind of coaching for his job. Getting to 12 is very realistic. And if you were to look at some of the names that are likely to be available, a lot of times, Landon, when you're drafting at 12, you can get maybe the 7th or 8th best player in a draft. Let's use the Cowboys history. They were drafting, it was 2021. They were drafting at 10. They traded back to 12, and they got Micah Parsons, who was a consensus top 6 player in that class.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is. Like I said, 12 is certainly in range where, you know, if one more of these quarterbacks decide to come out and pushes some of this stuff down, just because of the way sequencing happens, because of team needs, and because of positional value, you may get an opportunity. Because, you know, think about what your needs are right now. Your needs are, you know, linebacker, cornerback, potentially safety, I mean, defense, basically the entire defense. But you could get, like, you know, a Caleb Downs or, you know, Sonny Sykes and at 12, because they get pushed down because of positional value, a combination of positional value and draft sequencing. And because you're right there at 12, you're able to kind of pick up the scraps of a top 10 player that maybe kind of snuck through a little bit.
All right. So you guys know that I do the consensus board every year. I take a lot of the best draft analysts and I put their boards together. We're already starting to get some data in. And if you look at the guys, like, let's say a range of 4, okay, so guys between 8 to 13, 8 to 14, I know that's 6, but here are some of the names in that range who you guys will recognize. Reuben Bain, the edge rusher from Miami. Jeremiah Love, if you're interested in a running back from Notre Dame, he's one of the guys. Carnell Tate, a wide receiver. The Cowboys don't have a need at receiver, but maybe that's somebody that could trade up. You know, I wouldn't be surprised.
Would trade up
yeah,
for.
Exactly. Jermod McCoy, the cornerback from Tennessee, who a lot of people really like. David Bailey, the edge rusher from Texas Tech. You're getting like elite level prospects on defense that you absolutely need. But if you go down to the 17, 18 range, it's more like in the CJ Allen, the Kenyon Sadiq, the tight end from Oregon. It's Mekhi Lemon. It's Denzel Boston. And those are still good players, but you're getting a different caliber of player. And even if you use like draft history, and I know you can't always do this one for one, but take a look at the last 5 picks at pick number 12. Tyler Booker, Bo Nix, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jamison Williams, Micah Parsons. Probably the worst pick there is Bo Nix. I mean, Bo Nix is a franchise level quarterback, right?
Yeah.
But you go to pick 18 and it's a lot more hit and miss. It's Gray Zabel, Jack Campbell, Treylon Burks, Austin Jackson, Garrett Bradbury. Again, there's some decent players in there, but you're likely not choosing the best player at a respective position. Like Micah was the top edge rusher at his position. Tyler Booker was the top guard. Jamison Williams, I believe, was the first or second receiver off the board. Even go back a little bit further, 2020, Henry Ruggs was the first receiver off the board. There is a big difference in the caliber of player you're going to get. And then on top of that, with value, the difference between pick 12 and like 18 or 17 or 18 is the equivalent to a second round pick. So are you willing to give up a second round pick of value for a meaningless week 18 win? We'll see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see exactly how they play this. And look, I think, we'll, like I said, we'll talk about this next coming segment. It'll be interesting to kind of try to read the tea leaves a little bit, because I do think that they're going to approach this entire week like a normal game week, and we won't really know about what their intentions are until we get into the game and see exactly how it unfolds. Because I think that there's a high likelihood that we get in there and someone like Dak or some of these starters play a quarter or something like that, or a certain amount of into the game, and then before they pull them.
The other thing that I just want to mention really quickly is that this team really needs more elite talent. And I know that this draft is it's not like an all-time class, right? It's not super strong with like big name quarterbacks or wide receivers, and that generally drives drafts, right? But man, if you want to get like a Reuben Bain who can be a day one starting defensive end, he might be there at pick 11, 12, 13. If you want to get the best safety or maybe just the best defensive back in the draft, and Caleb Downs, like go look at the history of where safeties get drafted in round one. Minkah Fitzpatrick, Derwin James, Kyle Hamilton. I think those guys were all drafted around 13 or 14. It is a big deal. And I can't emphasize this enough. The caliber of players you're going to get at 12 compared to 17 or 18. How much is one win worth it at the end of a season? We'll find out.
Yeah. And I think, again, like it's, you're not trading anything for it. You're literally getting it just by not winning this game, right? And so it seems like an easy proposition just to kind of value it out. The question is, how do you kind of play the game in such a way that you meet all the goals, which include, not winning the game?
So let's get to that. How do the Cowboys properly execute a tank? Again, a tank is the wrong word, but we'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Whether you're starting a new routine or jumping into player projections for the first time, trying something new can feel like a challenge. But with PrizePicks, it always feels good to be right. And with high-pressure football matchups every single weekend and elite hoops action almost every night, the action never slows down, and PrizePicks lets you stay in control. PrizePicks is the daily fantasy app that makes watching sports even more exciting by letting you build lineups based on player projections, no drafts, no waiting. Just pick more or less and play your way. And getting started on PrizePicks is quick and simple, and the app is super easy to navigate. So download the PrizePicks app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. All right, let's talk about how do you properly execute a tank without embarrassing the franchise and not getting guys hurt? Because one of the things that I've heard is like, hey, leave Dak out there. He can protect himself. Get Jaden Blue in the game. Use some more backup offensive linemen. That seems dangerous to everybody involved.
Well, I mean, the first thing is you have to look at all the masters you're trying to serve here, all the things you're trying to accomplish, right? You're trying to make sure that you have players, like veteran players that are in contract situations, that they get their needs. And it's not even always just about contract situations. It's about, goals, like someone trying to reach 1,000 yards or whatever, right? So you have to put that over here. You have to handle your younger players in a way that how does it influence the older players? And you just kind of named one of those, right? Like, it's easy to just say, hey, put Jaden Blue out there at running back and let him take all the snaps while, you've got Dak Prescott out there. You can't necessarily do that, right? Because you may not trust him on blitz pickup. So it's situations like that you have to account for. And so it really becomes about when is the quarterback in the game and when is your starting quarterback out of the game, right? Because when your quarterback is in the game, your offense almost, except for maybe some skill positions, but really I'm just meaning the wide receivers at this point, your offense needs to be the starters basically, because if you're going to get into any kind of passing situation, especially against New York, who I'm assuming that they're going to be playing because they're a young team that's got a lot of young players that they just want to see these guys play. They've got 3 pass rushers who can come after you. So the Cowboys need to be able to pass the football in their normal sets and be able to protect Dak Prescott, because the last thing, like we said, the ultimate goal here is to make sure that your superstars and your key players get out of this game safely and don't get injured, whether that's on the field or whether it's because of a huge hit, that sort of thing.
Think about how much time we spent last offseason talking about all these guys that were injured between, Deron Bland coming off an injury, Trayvon Diggs, who had a major knee injury. You had DeMarvion Overshown, who had a major knee injury. And, by the way, Dak Prescott suffered a season-ending hamstring injury. So much of the offseason was consumed of, okay, when are these guys going to be back? How do they get them on the field? You don't want to have that be an issue coming out of week 18, because if somebody suffers an injury in week 18, they're probably not going to be ready for week 1, and that is going to have a massive implication on this team's future. It's just not worth it. And again, I know that Jerry Jones wants to win. I know that Brian Schottenheimer wants to get, to 500. It is not, I just don't see the big goal, the big reason why to go so hard after that in already a lost season.
Yeah, and those injuries completely derailed this season, right? In a lot of different ways. So, okay, so after hearing all that, what you're probably saying to yourself, well, why don't they just sit these guys? Why don't they just not play them at all? Which the problem is that that's just not a realistic option if they're healthy. These guys want to play. There's like the player side of this that we can all sit here and argue against all we want, but they are going to feel the way they feel because they're driven the way that they're driven to play the way they have to play. So I think you have to serve that master as well. And so how do you navigate all this, right? And I think the way you do it is you go through the week like it's a normal week. Dak takes the first team starts, you plan for Dak to start and go out there, and then you play the game like Dak Prescott got injured after the first quarter and just simply pull him out, right? And then at that point, the defense, it's a lot easier, right? The defense is already kind of backups at this point. So you just maybe shorten the leash on the rotations a little bit more with some of your superstars. But on offense, it's all about whether Dak's in the game. And once Dak comes out of the game, then you can start rotating in backup offensive linemen, backup running backs, that sort of thing. And I think out before that, you could probably, just similarly as with the defense, shorten the leash on the rotations a little bit of your wide receivers if you're worried about guys like Lamb and Pickens getting exposed and getting hurt, on the last week of the season.
And I've got a list of some guys that I think at least should see their snaps monitored. And let's start on defense. Malik Hooker has been dealing with some kind of toe injury all season long. This one's a little more complicated because they have a bunch of injuries at safety. But I think if you can limit his snaps, I think you do that. DeMarvion Overshown, for obvious reasons, but on top of that, he suffered a concussion in week 16, I believe. Now, he said he would have been ready if it was a normal week.
Yeah.
He's one, I know he's going to want to play. But man, it would be so easy just to pull him back a little bit because of everything that's gone on with him. Quinn Williams has been dealing with a neck injury. You have Kenny Clark, who's been dealing with an elbow injury. You have Jadeveon Clowney, who's old. Maybe you pull his snaps back a little bit. Those are the guys on defense. And then on offense, it's pretty clear that Tyler Smith's dealing with some kind of knee tendonitis. Maybe you have him play the first quarter and then Nate Thomas slides out there. CeeDee Lamb's been dealing with an ankle injury. Javonte Williams dealing with a shoulder injury. I think all these guys play a little bit, and you keep them active to help you maybe get through a game if something were to happen. But there's no reason for them to see their usual amount of snaps.
Yeah. I mean, again, it doesn't need to be like a full line shift. It can just be a lot of key players, but it does need to kind of center around, especially the offensive line and running back stuff. It does need to center around when Dak is in the game and when Dak is out of the game. So, I do think that's a good list, right? And anybody that has any kind of bumps or bruises that maybe aren't on the injury list as well, like it's just what it is that you've turned the dial from outrageous pushing these guys to get on the field to erring to the side of caution, right? And just kind of bumps and bruises.
Do you adjust the game plan a little bit? Like, I mean, the Cowboys have been fairly balanced all season long, but you try to maybe run the ball a little bit more for, number one, to maybe reduce the number of shots that your quarterback takes, and number two, just to get out of the game faster. And honestly, number three, it's never a bad idea to work on your run game. Try to get downhill. Maybe we see more Phil Maffa. Maybe we see more Malik Davis. That's what I would like to see. Is it's going to be boring football. And I apologize to everybody who's watching it, but that's probably the best way to get in and out of this game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's the worst idea. I mean, again, we're trying to shorten the game as much as we can. Again, we're trying to do a lot of different things in this game, but yeah, I do think that one of the best ways to do it is just to make sure that the clock is constantly moving. Your quarterback isn't standing back there and letting those three defensive ends kind of go after Dak. That's one of the only good parts of their team, honestly. We talked about how there's very little risk and very little upside here. Let's reduce that by just making the game shorter and by controlling the clock a little bit better by running the football.
And I think a guy like Jake Ferguson, who I didn't even mention, dealing with a calf injury, we know how tricky those can be.
No need.
There's no need for him to be out there. So I would expect the Cowboys to at least exercise some caution. We'll see if they win the game or not, but do not expect the full usual lineup that you've seen all season long. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Make sure you subscribe and follow the podcast so you get all of the latest episodes. And make sure that you check out the Everydayer Club. You'll get ad-free episodes of the Locked On Cowboys podcast, plus members-only Discord access and so much more. And for those of you on video, check out the first ever 24/7 national NBA YouTube channel. On audio, make sure that you make your second listen the Locked On NFL podcast. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.